Good evening and welcome to our event, Shaping Aboriginal Innovation in Education. I'd like to start by giving a shout out to Maxine, Bronte, and the rest of the Spark Festival team on such a fantastic first day of events. My name is Sushendra, and I'm the Vice Curator of the Global Shaper community here in Sydney. And before I proceed, I'd like to invite my fellow Shaper, Remy Crick, to take us through the Acknowledgement of Country.
Thank you very much, Hashendra. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their continuing connection to land, air, water, and community. We pay our respects to these traditional custodians, their ongoing cultures, and to the elders past, present, and emerging. I'd also like to acknowledge all of the Indigenous people dialed into tonight's webinar. As a proud Worimi woman and moderator for tonight's Spark Festival webinar, The Great Australian Reset, Shaping Aboriginal Innovation in Education, I'm delighted to be a part of tonight's event and would like to hand back to Hashendra to provide some further context into the Great Australian Reset and also the Global Shapers community.
Thank you, Remy. So in the following hour, we have a panel discussion with some fantastic speakers, and we'll leave a few minutes towards the end of the event for some Q&A. So please feel free to send through your questions through the Q&A function on your screen. Tonight's event is the first of 3 that the Global Shaper community is running as part of a series called The Great Australian Reset for the 2020 Spark Festival. Our hub of Sydney is part of a network of over 400 in 148 countries, comprising of young leaders under 30, driving socially impactful initiatives in their cities. We often come together from diverse backgrounds and sectors, including entrepreneurship, healthcare, engineering, arts, and in many cases, a combination of the above. So our community is a part of the World Economic Forum, which is the international organization for public-private cooperation, and it convenes world leaders through a number of platforms, which include the global meetings in Davos, which happens in Switzerland every year. So the Great Australian Reset concept is a locally inspired and adapted version of the Great Reset initiative that the Forum launched earlier this year, alongside leaders like the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres and Prince Charles, in response to the political, economic, and social upheavals caused by the COVID-19 crisis. So what we're hoping to achieve through these conversations and the related initiatives that we as a community will roll out nationally and internationally in the coming few months is to explore how we can challenge both government and business leaders in Australia to reframe the pressures and uncertainties caused by the COVID-19 crisis as an opportunity to redesign the most inequitable and unsustainable aspects of our society and our economy. I shall now hand it over to Remy to introduce tonight's topic in a bit more detail. By way of introduction, Remy is a proud Worimi woman and is passionate about sustainability and promoting the economic development of Indigenous youth. She holds a Bachelor and a Master of Architecture, a Diploma of Early Childhood Education and Care, and she's currently studying a Certificate of Executive Management and Development. Day to day, she works as a Product Development Manager at the Commonwealth Bank of Australia, and on the side, she assists in the running of her family business, Planet Childcare. She's the founder of Next Move, a platform that matches education, employment, and business interests of Indigenous Australian youth with opportunities offered by Australian organizations, and she's very excited to be the host of tonight's webinar. Over to you, Remy.
Thank you, Hashendra. So as we alluded to before, the Global Shapers Sydney community was inspired by the recently released Australian film In My Blood It Runs, and this acted as a catalyst for us to focus on the specific topic of how to best incorporate traditional methods of learning and education into the mainstream education system. In addition to this, upon reflecting on current events such as the Black Lives Matter movement, the resetting of the Closing the Gap targets, and also the increased disparity of well-being to Indigenous communities as a result of COVID-19, we're enthused to showcase how imperative it is for Indigenous people to gain more agency and foster traditional methods of learning and child rearing, and for the mainstream education system to better incorporate this. So here with me tonight, I'm very privileged to be joined by an esteemed panel of guests. We have, firstly, Gunditjmara man, Professor Mark Rose, who is the Pro Vice Chancellor of Indigenous Strategy and Innovation at Deakin University, Academic Director and Expert Facilitator for Reconciliation Australia, and also UNSW's AGSM Emerging Indigenous Executive Leaders Program. We're also very privileged to be joined by Gumbaynggirr and Wakka Wakka man, Liam Ridgeway, from IndigiGig, Indigitek and NGNY, and he's an esteemed Aboriginal innovator and entrepreneur. So to kick things off, I'd love to hear from the panelists how each of you are currently involved in the mainstream education system, and also give a bit of background about each of the initiatives that you're involved in. Professor
I'll let you
Mark,
kick it off, Mark.
Would you like me to go first?
Yes, please. That'd be great. Thank you.
Okay, so this is great coordination. Sorry about that. Look, my day job is as Pro Vice Chancellor Indigenous at Deakin University. And in that role, my job is to make sure that every student at Deakin has an Aboriginal experience, and that Aboriginal perspectives are imbued in every course that I do. But on top of that, I work at a community level with Victorian Aboriginal Education, which has me a seat at ACARA, leading the national curriculum, Indigenous Perspectives, and VCAA, which does the Victorian curriculum. And look, I've been in education, you can see I'm just a young person, but I've been in education over 40 years, and I've seen some remarkable issues and some changes there. I think it's time. I'll just leave with one provocation. I think it's time that this country really reaps the value of Indigenous knowledge.
Perfect.
Awesome.
Thank you.
So as Remy Crick mentioned, so my name's Liam Ridgeway. I'm a Gumbaynggirr and Wakka Wakka man. As mentioned as well, I wear many hats, particularly as the co-founder of Indigitek and NGNY, for short, and also Indigitek charity, which I co-founded in 4.5 years ago. So one of the things that I've been seeing quite a fair bit of in terms of in Indigenous education, in particularly the STEM space, is the growth of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people starting to explore STEM pathways. It certainly is nowhere where it should and needs to be, but there is certainly an opportunity for growth in this sector. In particular, not just how within our community that we're looking at building up skills and then being able to work in the corporate or the wider STEM sector, but how we also look at the use of these skills and this knowledge to then pass back onto and work within our own community as well, and utilize the knowledges that can then be, I guess, translated into other areas in terms of education, health, justice, etc., and how we look at STEM pathways to further grow the many years of learning and actions that we've already been taking in those related spaces. Another piece as well around, to Mark's point, is around Indigenous perspectives, is also the need and the growth for the use of technologies like Wingur's education platform to teach Indigenous perspectives at a preschool, kindergarten and high school level, to really start driving those perspectives and shared understanding within our community. It definitely doesn't happen as much as it needs to, and I'm sure that we'll obviously talk more about it in this session today.
Thank you very much, Liam and Mark. I suppose I'll start with you, Mark. Would you like to give a bit of an insight into what you believe the current state of the university sector is at the moment, and how that, I suppose, in this current state, how that incorporates Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander learning? I know that you're a part of many groundbreaking initiatives, part of Deakin University and also UNSW, so I'd love to hear how that came about, and what you believe the current state to be in the university sector.
Remy, thanks for that. When I started my higher education career, I got a job in a general faculty, a business faculty, teaching business management, and I was really excited about teaching my people. And I got told on appointment that that particular university had 60 Aboriginal people studying engineering. And I got so excited, and I jumped in a car and raced down to that faculty, walked in, and I said, "Where are the 60 blackfellas doing engineering?" And when we looked at their names, they were actually Malaysian Aboriginals, not Australian Aboriginals. So it took another 10 decades before I had any Aboriginal people sitting in front of me in my class. I've been part of the rise of the Black Academy. In the state of Victoria, lockdown Victoria, you can tell by our great hairdos that barbers are off the scope. In Victoria, I was probably one of the first Aboriginal academics in it, and I know I was the first in a business faculty. I yearn for the day. You know, we work in programs, and that AGSM program is really good. In the early days, blackfellas were invited to uni, and they did associate degrees in enclaves, so they were cut off from the rest of the university. In the time that I've been in higher ed, I've seen them not only invade the humanities, that they're now invading the STEM, and it's great comments by Liam, because I sit on Chris Matthews' Aboriginal Maths Association board, to see that STEM, you know, my cousin Misty Jenkins split the T cell of the influenza germ, and went to Oxford as a postdoc, got a job at Cambridge, and now she's back. A Gunditjmara woman from Western Victoria, deadly. But I'm so rapt when kids heed the call of their ancestors and stand up and go to a TAFE course and work their way through. I was on a webinar last week with Irabina Rigney from South Australia, one of the most brightest and intelligent Aboriginal academics I know. He started life as a diesel mechanic because that was the only pathway in. Lionel Bamblett, an education here in Victoria, started life as a fitter and turner. And so the moment we got the chance to go to uni, we've seized it, and we've come in great numbers. And we've got pro vice chancellors, we've got professors, all the way through all the 39 universities in Australia. But I worry about dispossession, not black dispossession, but white dispossession. What about the average non-Indigenous person who goes along? Will they get an Indigenous experience? And we know from deaths in custody that it's when the professions make ill-informed decisions that our people suffer so much. So it's the teaching of Aboriginal people and the teaching about. And if we can put our methodology in there, all the better.
Thank you so much for that, Professor Mark. From that, I suppose, like, the key teachings were resilience and generational change, and it's so great to see your generation leading that way. I'd just like to quickly introduce, we have Jane Vadiveloo from Children's Ground, and she's the CEO there. Thank you so much for dialing in tonight. She's the partner organisation of the recently acclaimed In My Blood It Runs documentary, and we're so glad to have you part of the session here tonight, Jane. We just did a quick round asking how each of us are currently involved in the education space. I'd love to hear a little bit about how you're involved in the education space in your own words.
Yeah, thank you. And I do apologise sincerely for being late. And I guess one of the reasons I'm late is partly why I'm engaged in the education space. I'm a non-First Nations person. I've had the privilege of working alongside First Nations people for over 3 decades. One of our greats here, First Nations Arunda professors who I've known for a long time, celebrated artist, incredible published author, lives with dialysis, lives with a history of her one son dying at racial violence, son passing away through suicide, and yesterday another of her sons passed away. So at the moment we are all here together with her, with lots of families coming in. So I got distracted with time because time sort of doesn't matter, but sitting at the heart of this is a woman who has held the language and cultures and sciences, incredible sort of botanist and in her own right, and has done a beautiful book on the birds and the array of birds and how birds for Aranda people hold not only an identity but a meaning and a health and a story and a knowledge and a way of understanding the seasons and space and people, connection. And so for me, as a non-First Nations person, you train to be experts in your field, and in my life's journey I've come across extraordinary experts of the oldest living cultures in the world, knowledge systems that are phenomenal. And for me as a non-Aboriginal person in a country that has systematically and deliberately oppressed that cultural knowledge system, I feel it is my responsibility to shift the systems of power in which I sit. And so I partner with First Nations leaders and professors and Children's Ground, the systems change movement that places First Nations knowledge systems at the heart and the right of First Nations children to enter those from birth and through life, through their first languages, through their first cultures, and to bring in the Western and global systems around that, as any other child has the right to do within this world, and particularly within Australia. So we see the impact of that. We work in communities where usually, children are considered to be problematic, and there's a deficit focus, and there's a remedial focus that's placed on children who are completely brilliant. And when we surround children with their first languages and cultures, they shine, and they are incredible. And these are our oldest systems of STEM that are within our first cultures. So I'm part of a continue a journey that many started decades ago and have fought for, and we're the holders of that at this time, and I'm very lucky to be part of that journey.
Thank you so much, Jane.
So
Explanation. Liam, if I could hand over to you to just give a bit of.
Sorry, say that again. I'm just getting a little bit of feedback.
Sorry. Liam, if you'd like to just explain, I suppose in your own words, what the current state of affairs to be in the high school system. I know that you do a lot of work with high school students, and I'd love to hear of your first-hand experiences with that.
Yep. So through, looking at the overall schooling system. So through, the experiences of just the general curriculum, there is, more exposure, particularly to STEM and ideas and thoughts around STEM. And Mark mentioned before as well the likes of ATSIMA, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Maths Alliance, which in particular focuses on engaging with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students, particularly in maths. I think it's hugely important of the presence of organisations like that to actually demonstrate, the role of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are already excelling, particularly across STEM. When I look at, what we do as Indigitek, what we really focus on is how do we look at all the role models that already exist in promoting those, as opposed to typically the sports stars that exist in our community. And not saying there's anything wrong with the sports stars, because absolutely they play their role. But from our perspective, what we really want to do is start to to create more exposure to Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people who are already practitioners in STEM doing great stuff, or who are learning and going down those pathways and sharing their stories and journeys about why they have particularly gone down those pathways. So in the high school space, we're tending to see now that young people are actually talking about, okay, well, I can see myself starting to embark on these journeys. I ran a robotics workshop for young Indigenous kids. My first one I ran about 4 years ago, and then I passed it on to the National Centre of Indigenous Excellence for that to become part of one of their ongoing programs. And through that experience, some of the kids in that space were saying, I've kind of dabbled in this space before, but I've never had like an entire day where I've been able to actually focus and have experience doing building robots and programming those robots. And then 3 students at the end of that session came up to me and said, I really loved what I was doing, and my dream in the future is to now explore opportunities, particularly in engineering. And when I heard that, I was like, oh wow, okay, this is really making an impact, and we're having effect on people's lives. And the idea that we really talk about here is exposure. And a key word for us is, like, with that exposure, is around what are we doing to be able to demonstrate to people in our community that, again, as I was saying before, there are people who have done this, and now we can actually all go on this journey because someone who's had a similar life experience to me, who looks like me, has already embarked on this journey. So now, I can also embark on this journey too. And if you kind of think about it as well, if you kind of look historically and referencing some of the stuff that Mark was talking about, is when people in our community see others doing things, they will also start to embark and explore on those journeys. So when I was at university, there was between 50 to 100 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people studying at the time I was at university. And I went to University of Technology, Sydney. If you look at most universities now, they're looking at anywhere from 200 plus people studying at university, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. If you look at Newcastle University, they've got over 1,000 Indigenous students at the university. And what we want to do at Indigitek is start looking at how STEM becomes normalised, because we've started to normalise going to university within our community. So now how do we actually start shifting that so that we're looking at the normalisation of STEM and the growth of that in a similar way that we've seen the uptake of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people going to university.
Thank you so much for that, Liam. And I suppose, Jane, you're a lot more connected to the primary school and also preschool side of education. How do you think that STEM fits in to that realm?
Oh, completely. I mean, I'm incredibly excited about what Indigitek does, for example, and that should be something that's introduced from early years and all the way through. And so that's the expertise that you want to build on and share nationally, really. You don't want to be reinventing wheels. You want to be working from the base they've sort of created already. And those opportunities are exactly right. People are hungry for them. Young people are incredibly digitally savvy and have a whole literacy in that space, much better than mine from early years. So I think it had a fantastic, and I think particularly in places where we work, which is often regional and remote, and with a digitised, connected world, you can get better connectivity in the middle of Arnhem sometimes in Melbourne, and there's incredible possibilities, I think, for people in the digital space to be connected with global economies. So I think it's absolutely critical.
Thank you so much, Jane. And I suppose maybe going off that topic a little bit more, obviously there are different challenges experienced in urban communities versus rural and remote communities in terms of integrating Indigenous education. And you could say that potentially in the more rural and regional areas, there is, in some instances, a better connection to the Aboriginal culture. How do we, I suppose, provide consistency so that this is something that's widespread and can be experienced by all school children?
That's a really good question. And I know from the work of ACARA, which is the compulsory years, they've got a pretty sophisticated Indigenous curriculum that we've got out there. The problem is that many of the teachers in the workforce, through their tertiary years, had no access to Aboriginal perspectives. And the real danger is that with those rich curriculum points, that they just don't reach for a copy of Rabbit Proof Fence. That what we've got to do is convince educators and in some ways change the narrative. There's a group of powerful educators out there that sees that Indigenous perspective is dumbing down the curriculum and pandering to a minority. I take the opposite. In a world in which the kids on the reading mats, Jane, some of the kids that you deal with, where the world that they face will change dramatically post-COVID and just change anyway. America and Europe's not going to be the world power. It's likely to be China. It's likely to be India. So can it be by putting Indigenous perspectives in our curriculum, we embed in all kids the ability to deal with competing worldviews and find and anchor themselves who they are? This is nation setting. This is national maturity. And it's far from pandering to minorities. It's not dumbing down the curriculum. It's making our kids neurologically nimble to deal with different concerns. And I often throw up the example that everyone knows the Japanese bombed Darwin at the start of World War II. But if you peel back and put an Aboriginal perspective there is an elder in South Australia, a great man, Brian Butler. We were standing outside the Darwin Convention Centre when he went into a bit of men's business, and he said he was there when the Japanese bombs fell. And we go, tell us the story. He said, I had just been stolen from my family down south, brought to Darwin. I was there for a couple of weeks. The Japanese bombed Darwin. I got sent back to my family. He goes, thank God for the Japanese. Which is really counterintuitive to the way that story is told. So Brian Butler's not completely right, and the Western narrative is not completely right, but there is truth somewhere between. If through Indigenous perspectives we can ground all kids in their identity and ground all kids in the ability to think laterally, resetting, for the future, it's going to be a lot easier.
Thank you so much, Mark. And I suppose, Liam, we touched on this a bit earlier before, but what do you believe to be one of the biggest inhibitors to creating some of this positive change and, I suppose, mainstream adoption of some of the fantastic initiatives that you're driving?
So it's quite interesting because I guess living in like an urban setting, you kind of get this this false sense of, I guess, progression in terms of the perspectives of wider Australia and the way that Indigenous perspectives and Indigenous ways of life are kind of accepted, I guess, in this country. And then you start to then kind of shift out into regional and remote areas, and you start to realise that non-Indigenous Australia really, I guess, quite conservative and push back against Indigenous perspectives. And so, I could give you an example. So my younger sister, she's in year 12 at the moment. She's about to do a HSC, and she's in a regional town called Armidale, New South Wales. And her and I have lots of conversations about her schooling and the amount of, I guess, challenges that she has in terms of bias and racism in this day and age is absolutely insane. The experiences that she's having, and I kind of experienced a little bit of that growing up in an urban setting, but then so many people are from multicultural backgrounds that there's less racism in an urban setting. But then when I look at my younger sister, the experiences that she's having, for example, she was in her history class, and her teacher wanted to teach more about Indigenous perspectives in history. So then she started integrating more of that into her lessons. A few of the students went home and talked to their parents about it, the parents put in a complaint to the principal then turned around and said to the teacher, you can't embed too many of these perspectives. This is in 2019 and 2020. So when we're talking about the challenges in this country, the challenges are based around how do we actually embark on a shared journey, which is a shared journey of understanding, but a shared journey of telling the truth and being open to what the truth is of the history of this country. Because if we understand the foundation as to why Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are where we are at the moment in terms of society and our standing in Australian society, we then start to get an understanding of, okay, well, we've got this foundational knowledge, we now know where we're at and why we are where we're at, and what we need to then do to move forward. And so that means going on a shared journey with Indigenous and non-Indigenous people alike, so that we're all learning perspectives from one another, so that then we're able to grow and move forward together in, I guess, a way that I think is more productive. And, to Mark's point, how do we actually start having more of these shared journeys so that we're cross-pollinating and creating more ideas so that we're actually able to compete, at a global level too? When Mark was talking, it kind of got me thinking about, well, if we start thinking like that as well, and in a more of kind of competitive kind of co-opetition style, it'll actually help us start to grow more productively as a country as well, because then we'll start having different ways of thinking, different perspectives, different ways of problem solving, and then being able to then bring all that together so that we can then look at new ways of innovating and inventing.
Absolutely.
Definitely. Thanks, Liam. And Jane, in the movie In My Blood It Runs, I suppose definitely this documentary touched on everything that Liam and Mark have just alluded to. But how do you think, what's the best way for both Indigenous and non-Indigenous people to drive this positive change?
Look, I really do, In My Blood It Runs is an incredibly important documentary directed by Minuel and the families, Dewan himself and his grandmothers and mother and father. And, the families' aim for the film
Might have a technical issue here.
I think we do.
Hopefully she comes back on in a second. Maybe we can jump over to you, Mark. What do you think is the best way that we can start to create this positive change?
Look, it's 1,000 conversations, and they start at dinner parties, at water coolers, in the bar. I mean, look at yourself, look at Liam as two examples of Indigenous, strength and power, and you can't be what you can't see, and you guys are a lighthouse to those kids doing on the reading mat, in the playground, and sweating at year 12 exams at the moment. If we're the oldest living continuous culture, then we're by definition the oldest intellectual tradition. And I often tell people to look at their watch and give every hour 1,000 years. Aristotle's Plato was here 1 minute 3 seconds ago. Our knowledge goes back, so we just got to know that we carry with us the greatest of assets. When we stand up and heed our ancestral mandate, we are a power force. And you read out your qualifications, Remy. 10 years ago, not many people would be able to do that. 15 years ago in Victoria, only 2 Aboriginal kids completed year 12. So the revolution's happening, and let's not waste it with talking to old guys like me, but the younger generation. In a world where there are 4 faces of Australia. A colonial face. There is a face that says that we are part of Asia geographically. there's a face that we're the world's most broadest multicultural country, and we house the world's oldest living continuous culture. If that doesn't make us deadly, I don't know. And deadly means really good for those mob who aren't blackfellas, and that could be confusing. But if that doesn't make us exceptional, I don't know what does. And what we have to do is grab it and own it. Yeah.
Definitely. Thank you, Mark. And what about you, Liam? What are your thoughts?
So I think that, again, I guess coming back to that point around this, I guess, the shared journey, and start looking at the Indigenous perspective. So one organisation that I did want to highlight in this instance, who's been doing quite a bit for a little while, is the Stronger Smarter Institute. They really look at ways of being able to embed Indigenous perspectives, and teaching teachers how to start embedding those perspectives. But I think, to my point before, how do we start really being able to, at a primary school and high school level, embed those perspectives so that, I guess, being more open-minded about Indigenous perspectives, Indigenous presence in this country is understood and normalised, so that it isn't questioned by the time that you kind of start to embed those, at a learning level in terms of tertiary, or even at a corporate and workspace level, where people don't kind of second guess it. It just becomes a normalised kind of, I guess, way of thinking. And so I think that in terms of being able to look at, again, I guess, implementing other positive experiences, and how is Indigenous Australia able to connect with community as well. So from an Indigitech perspective, a lot of people will come to me and say, "Oh, I've met a couple of Aboriginal and or Torres Strait Islander people in my life, but I've not really talked to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people." And so what I say to people, particularly in STEM, is you can connect with us. We'll become a gateway and a pathway for you to start then connecting through community, and to start really being able to establish relationships with local Aboriginal organisations. So not just going out and getting a reconciliation action plan, not going out and just doing cultural competency training, which those things are absolutely important and absolutely play a role in the ecosystem, but going out and establishing real relationships with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander organisations and the people within those organisations, so that then what we do is then we're actually building relationships between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australia, where all of a sudden a conversation that is had isn't, "Oh, I know someone who knows someone," or "I once met this Aboriginal person." It should be, "Oh, this Aboriginal person that I know does this, this, and that, and I've had conversations with them about this, and I've lived some of their experiences with them," and making that become more of a normalized thing, instead of, "Oh, we're going to stand over here and you guys kind of stand over there." We want to be able to, again, go on, as I've been saying, that shared journey. And I think it's important that we're able to be open and talk to that, because I think a lot of people at times as well, and sometimes we do this as a community, but some people think, oh, they get a little bit nervous to engage with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. With Indigitech and with a lot of organisations, you build up that relationship. You can ask what you might think are the silly questions. We'll be able to support and guide you in being able to start learning and understanding Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community, culture, and country. But you have to want to be able to find that starting point. And what we do as Indigitech is we help people find that starting point by finding people who have interest in this, in particularly STEM, and want to learn more about the Indigenous space within that. And then, as I said, us being then the gateway where we can for people in these industries to then start trickling through to just connect with community at a grassroots level without any agenda, and just connecting and building relationships and then progressing from there.
Definitely. It's so great to have non-Indigenous allies in the community that are really driving this forward as well. Mark, did you have something to add?
Oh, I just agree with every word that Liam said. Agree with your brother. Thank you for that. It's
Thank you.
Just those people who do come in to put their toe in the water in our space. It is so fulfilling and nation building. Yeah.
And what do you think the role of government and also the private sector is in aiding this? I know that, Liam, you do a lot of work with different private sector entities to help embed some of the work that you're doing in the mainstream, which is really fantastic to see. Would you mind providing us a little bit of a background with those experiences?
Yeah, so it's if I kind of start it kind of simply, I'm tending to find that corporate Australia, and particularly in the tech industry, are just are leading the way. And when I talk about leading the way, I'm talking about it comparing it to government. So there's just so much, I guess, bureaucracy, red tape, politics behind government. But then when I'm talking in the tech industry, I'm able to connect with people who are decision makers, but those decision makers see a real need and a real intent to be able to engage and connect in this space, and want to be able to really build a relationship with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, but really be able to support the likes of Indigitek and other related organisations. So people actually, because Indigitek has DGR charity status, people will say to me, "Oh, hey, we want to donate to Indigitek, but we're also looking at multiple other Indigenous organisations to donate towards too as well. How can we do that?" I'm starting to see more and more of that happening, and it really, I guess, I look at this and I see it as a massive amount of, I guess, progress. But I guess I don't take for granted the position that we have as Indigitek to actually create, I guess, this bridge for people, non-Indigenous people in the tech sector, to actually engage and connect in with Indigenous communities in terms of donations and sponsorships. But then one of the other things as well that's quite interesting is that we have awareness as Indigitek with corporate America. So we have relationships in Silicon Valley, and those relationships in Silicon Valley seem to progress far easier and far quicker than me talking to state government or federal government in Australia. It's really interesting. So I'm able to talk to the other side of the world, and they're willing to support and engage us. We just had an inquiry to support Indigitek today from a global tech company whose headquarters is based out of New York, and these people are just randomly reaching out to us because they're understanding our presence, and what we've done. But I don't seem to be getting much of that from government, and then when government do want to engage, and I understand that there I guess strings attached, but there's always this massive agenda. Whereas what we're trying to do, and what a huge thing that we get a lot of corporate support from, is that we tell them what our strategic priorities are, what we're actually aiming to work towards, and then they're like, okay, we want to go on this journey with you because we understand that this is a journey that you understand and have a history with, and we want to support you in that journey. So we look at it, for us, by us, and corporate tech Australia and tech America want to support us in that journey because we understand the narrative and the strategic priorities that we want to progress forward with.
Wow, thank you so much, Liam. It's so interesting to hear about the relationships in the US. And hopefully we can get some of those learnings over here in Australia. Jane, if I could ask you, in filming In My Blood It Runs, I was just wondering what kind of relationships you had with, I suppose, the local government out there, and what other kind of organisations other than Children's Ground that you drew upon to try and create this change?
Yeah, look, I mean, I guess the main local government was the community itself and the elders, and so starting with that first cultural governance system, and the families, so all of the grandmothers and grandfathers that surround Duan were key decision makers through the whole film. They held the film, they determined the content of the film and the direction of the film and the outcomes of the film. So and then around that were a number of organisations and people who supported the film, and philanthropy and in Australia, and with the film for impact not just creating a film with social impact. I don't know, might have frozen, but we were very fortunate to have a number of partners from philanthropy through to the film industry backing the work and recognising that films like this need to be driven by community, held in the hands of the community and shown through the voices of children, and that must be integrity. Hand over, and did so brilliant.
Thank you, Jane. I think we were cutting in a little bit in and out, but we managed to get the gist of what you were saying, so thank you for that. We have the lovely Greta Richard as well, who's joined us, and she is the tech lead for the call, and she's been receiving some fantastic questions that have been coming in. Okay. So Greta, if you'd love to read out some of the questions that have been coming in, that'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've had a few questions on similar lines, so I've kind of combined them into a few larger questions so we can get through them a bit easier. The first question comes from, like, what do you think the educational technologies is in this space? There's also been a bit of a move to remote learning in universities and schools, and how can we use and ensure that we're utilising technology such that all students are able to access the education that they need?
So this is an interesting one. I might just jump in really quickly on this one. So
Sure.
we've been for a couple of years now. We've had this strong idea, and particularly in Indigitek, around remote living, learning, and working. So, and I don't want to say COVID's a good thing, but what it's done is it's actually pushed us to really up our game in terms of our ability to work remotely. So I used to speak at some conferences, and I used to say to people, how many people in this room, put up your hands if you get to remote work? And the majority of people were like, yeah, I do. But because obviously corporate policy, they might only remote work a couple of days a week and then physically be required to go into the office. But now we're all working from home. And so what we've really been pushing is this idea around how do we actually get the opportunity to live, learn, and work on country, so that you still have that connection to community, you have that connection to culture, but then when you're succeeding living on country, other people in your community actually get to see you going on that journey, and then they will tap you on the shoulder and say, "Oh, what are you doing? Like, what is it that you do? Like, I can see that you're doing well. How do I potentially start that? Do that, embark on that journey? Can I go and do what you did? And I think that that's important because it's insight and in mind. And it's important that we actually are looking at the opportunity of remote working and the technology now and how that plays a role. But the problem is how do we make sure that connection is consistent and access to technology is consistent. And Peter Riddell did a study a little while ago where only 43% of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people had access to the required, the necessary ICT equipment to be able to simply learn online, let alone being able to work online. So a few of the things that we're doing at the moment with Indigitek is we're actually just testing a refurbishment, a hardware refurbishment program at the moment, so that we can look at how we test that in community. We're also testing Raspberry Pis as well and building those, and then looking at how we then actually start looking at taking those out to community as well. But then also talking to a couple of big corporates in Australia. I'm not going to name names yet until we kind of establish more official partnerships, but in improving connectivity for all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to actually use the hardware to then get online so that they can then embark on their learning and working journeys.
Great, thanks, Liam. I might move on to... Oh, did you have something to say, Mark? Sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say that my university has got 4 physical campuses and 1 campus in the cloud. So we've been in that space for a long time. In terms of delivery, I agree totally with what Liam said, but I think when I started doing my work remotely, I was teleconferencing, and now I've moved into the space of broadcasting. You can put a bit of music and which Remy's heard, bad music sometimes, but you can put a bit of music and you broadcast now. So it's more about our traditional way of transferring knowledge through relationship. So if we see it as a platform that really draws our traditional way of teaching and learning, that's good.
Fantastic. So for the next question, this might be all of you are welcome to answer, sorry, but it might be slightly more in the realm of you, Jane, or possibly Mark, as to, well, actually all of you really. But so where is the line, and how do businesses move past this approach that they tend to have with essentially a tick box approach to Indigenous affairs and representations within companies and within education? Like, how can we actually encourage active participation and engagement from these companies?
I'll start off then, the others in the room will have a comment. But in knowledge of the West, you transfer knowledge through transaction. Ask a question, get an answer. In our way of doing it's relationship. Who are you? Where have you come from? And once you create a relationship, once you've exchanged knowledge, you're actually in a relationship with that person for life. And Remy acknowledged country when we started, but there's a whole lot of ancestors in modern day Aboriginal education. Jumpanaka, Errol West, and a whole lot of others. Not an ancestor, but an old Kay Price, Paul Hughes, Peter Buckskin, Mary Atkinson, who have led the way by putting forward our philosophy as a platform. And if you tear back the Aboriginal education philosophy, the teacher is also the learner is the teacher. It takes power out of the equation.
Great, thank you.
So I can pass. Yeah.
And
Yeah. Look,
sorry, you go, Jane. Yep.
I completely agree. I think as grows more knowledge that come from the nation and the principles that Australia will understand and what they can, so it is about listening, and they're incredible knowledge holders across these lands, and companies that do want to understand more, and it will only improve structure and the people. For companies, that there are many nations of these lands that have extraordinary connections, and those knowledge systems connect people, combine to create one of the most sophisticated systems that have endured. I think once companies understand, particularly at this time, as we see the massive risk that companies face and their own longevity with these short-term goals that aren't about sustainability, and as Professor, it is, and it's not responsibility. It's not about a piece of knowledge has not Australia, then they benefit from this.
Can I also just give a 30-second response to that as well?
Yep, go for it.
So for organizations looking to take a genuine approach, it needs to be a multi-year approach, and it's not just, am I achieving what I need to achieve this year in terms of tokenist, or I guess goals. but what am I doing to actually work on a multi-year approach? And how am I not just looking at outputs, but I'm looking at outcomes? So it's a combination of outputs and outcomes and how they flow through together, and then how you actually then strategically are able to achieve those, but invest in the longevity of it. So one of the things that reconciliation action plans do is they kind of give you this ability to map out what your targets and goals are for a particular year. But then when you've reached that target or goal, I end up hearing a lot of corporates kind of going, oh, well, I've reached that target for the year, so I'm going to put that to bed now, and I'm not going to work on that anymore. And I think that that's an absolutely insane thing to do, because if I said to someone who has a dollar target, if they reach their dollar target and they've got to make $1 million, for example, and then they reach that in the first 6 months, I'm not going to go on. That person still has a job to do to go and generate more revenue. So why doesn't that also flow through as well to all their other KPIs?
Yeah. We have time for one last quick question, and this is kind of directed at Jane, mainly because I want to know what your thoughts are on essentially how do we communicate the importance of Indigenous education. So in My Blood It Runs is this great documentary that does a fantastic job of spreading the message, but how can we get this idea to a wider audience? Do you guys have any ideas or plans?
Yes, absolutely. And I'm not quite sure when I got cut off earlier, but there is a national network called Ucherra Pampa, which is a national network of First Nations cultural educators across the country. They're grassroots educators, both within the mainstream and cultural education systems. There's probably about, people from 15, 16, 17 different nations who are represented on that. They continue work from many, many others. They certainly want to promote, accessible to mainstream Australia, the knowledge systems that exist in these lands. And Ucherra Pampa comes from an Aranda word around how each Marian or each area of land is connected underneath the land, a bit like the song lines that carry through country, but the knowledge systems that carry and connect from one nation to another. I think that where I have so much hope is actually the next generation. The next generations of First Nations young people are phenomenal. People like Seed, people like Nyack. You've got incredible spokespeople in the next generation of First Nations leaders who are emerging. We're going to uplift the voice, the work of, that many have done before, and the work of Professor here and also Indigitek. I think there are so many avenues where the knowledge systems are being amplified in many, many different ways. And I think the message that underpins all of it that I've heard today is mainstream Australia, corporate Australia, understanding that these knowledge systems have their own integrity, that they don't need to be compromised, that the value of those, if they're accepted and held and understood and respected, are going to benefit all of us. So I think that message has to continue. I think the work, that we're doing is one part of a huge network of work that's happening around the country. I think we have to call on non-First Nations people to assume their responsibilities, to understand better. And this is the thing that is always put at the feet of First Nations people. This is the responsibility of non-First Nations Australians to understand, to know our histories, to rectify the histories that we have, to truth tell, not to be afraid of that history, but to learn from it, to reconcile with it, to understand it so we can walk together and we can benefit from these. They're just, you all know this as First Nations people. Phenomenal knowledge systems. And as a psychologist, I know in psychology, in early childhood and in education, First Nations education systems outstrip anything in the West in terms of global innovation. Absolutely outstrip it. So we need this to be amplified within mainstream systems and structures. Unfortunately, we just need to amplify them up through articles, through publications, forums like this, until it becomes part of the mainstream narrative in Australia.
Fantastic. I think we're going to run out of time. Thank you so much for answering some questions. I'm going to hand back over to Hash to close us up for the night. Hash, I think your mic's off.
The wonders of technology. All right. can hear me now. So thank you so much, Greta, for handling the Q&A components of tonight. And thank you so much to the panelists and Remy as well for joining this event. And to everyone who's joined us, I think it's very much a journey that we are on, particularly as part of the Global Shaper community as well. Myself included, one reason why I was so inspired to do an event and chatted to Remy about doing this was because there's so much more that we have to learn as non-Indigenous people and non-Aboriginal people. And so I think this is going to be as part of, as Remy said before, it's a catalyst for us. The documentary has been a catalyst for our community to start focusing on what we can do to help. And so we're actually going to be setting up a reconciliation action plan in the coming few months, and we'll keep you all posted as part of that journey as well about that. But one final thing as well is that the wonderful team from the In My Blood It Runs documentary is offering all the viewers tonight a special code, and Greta can share that in the chat function as well. They're providing a discount to download the film. It's an absolute must-watch, and all the proceeds go to supporting the efforts of Children's Ground and the partner organizations of the project. It's a very easy, there's a link that should be there on the chat, and we'll also be sharing that on our LinkedIn page, which is Global Shaper Sydney as well. So you just need to put in the code SPARK, all in caps, and you should be able to access the movie. So maybe that's something you can do before you head to bed today as you relax today. And also, please join us. We have 2 other events running throughout the Spark Festival. One is called Shaping Trust in Business. That's happening from 7:10 to 8:10 p.m. on the 21st of October. And the other one is Shaping a Clean Energy Revolution. That's happening from 2 to 3 p.m. on the 23rd of October. So all that information, including all the other social impact work that we're doing as a community, can be accessed on the Global Shapers LinkedIn page. So it's Global Shapers Sydney. Follow us. The time is running out. So thanks again for joining us. Have a good evening. Bye.